All right. All right. Well, welcome everybody to another exciting session of Wine Around the World with Steve Wilson of City Wine Market. We're delighted to see you all here. My name is Kathleen Morgan. I'm with the library, and we do these sessions usually once a month where we explore a different region or a different type of wine all over the globe. So I will, I guess, remind you that a big shout out of thanks to our retirement bootcamp sponsor, who is Capital Federal Savings. If you are one of their customers and happen to be in one of their banks, make sure you say thank you very much for this program, because they help us meet our expenses and make this program possible. So I guess it's pretty much the same stuff. Most of you have done this before, but you can essentially, if you have a question, you can put those in the chat and I'll monitor those and make sure they get answered. We're a small enough group that if you have a question, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself, and I'll call on you, and we can answer questions that way, because it's a pretty casual event and we want it to be fun and informative. So with that, I will introduce Steve Wilson, our awesome wine guy who knows all sorts of stuff, and from everything from the soil to the temperatures to the wine and everything in between. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you and let you talk about our wines for this month.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And it's I always love doing these, so it's a pleasure to be here. Today, we're going to taste a couple rosés. And rosé is something that has, I actually, and I'll attribute this comment to the author, but it's there's a wine writer named Madeline Puckett who's a great writer, and she said, rosé really isn't so much a style of wine as it is a state of mind, and that's very true. Rosé is not something that is the kind of wine that you're supposed to contemplate. It doesn't reveal any hidden meaning to the universe. It really is just to remind us to kind of be in a moment that is pretty casual. My best rosé experiences are sitting outside, sitting at the beach, sitting at the lake, just kind of being. So that's really, I think that seeing that as a state of mind rather than a style of wine is probably the best way that I think to look at it. I think that she did a great job with that. So rosés are a seasonal thing. I mean, they're sort of. They're 90+% of all rosé really sees its peak time within a year to two of its vintage. So it's kind of like, think of rosé maybe like strawberries and tomatoes. You can get them year round, but they're best when they're fresh. And so it's a wine that generally the Northern Hemisphere rosés will be released early March to May. By this time of year, we're not seeing any new rosés. We've pretty much hit the 2021 is the for the most of the wines, not all, but 2021 is the current vintage for most rosé, and those have come to a halt. We'll have it on the shelf probably through Thanksgiving, but a lot of the rosés are kind of one-offs, and they get made in small quantities once a season, and then they're done. So it really, based on when rosés are released, it's really kind of the essence of spring and summer. Again, great rosés that you can drink in the wintertime, and still they're just as beautiful as they were when they were released. But really, rosé is kind of that spring and summer beverage. So being August, we'll kind of have a final farewell to the rosés of 2021. So I guess it's probably useful to kind of talk about the rosé process, because it is one that is depending on where it's made and how it's made, defines its style. But for the most part, rosé is made from red grapes, and you can use quite a lot. I mean, I've had rosés of Cabernet, Syrah, Nebbiolo, Zinfandel, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc. I mean, any red grape can produce a rosé. And so the way it's made is the red grapes are picked. They're often destemmed, and they're left to macerate. And they kind of soak the skins and the juice, because these have been lightly pressed, are going to start to bleed color and flavor, because the inside of the grape is kind of a neutral. It's a very useful chemical stew, but it is very little flavor, and it has no color. So all of that comes from the skin. In the case of a rosé, the skins will stay with the juice for maybe a couple hours. Now, compare that to if you were making, say, a Cabernet. You would hold those skins and juice together for maybe weeks instead of hours. So rosé is red grapes, very short maceration, then the skins are removed and it's fermented more times than not to total dryness. So the perception that rosés are sweet really just is exclusive to a small number of rosés, usually white Zinfandel. Most rosés are dry. So the first technique is maceration. The second technique, which is usually used in higher end wines, it's sort of even a byproduct of higher end wines. It's a method called the saignée method. It means to bleed, and basically they allow the juice. So again, you have a tank full of destemmed red grapes. They're crushing under their weight. Juice color is bleeding out of the skin, and then the winemaker opens the tap at the bottom of the tank and allows that juice, or free run juice, the saignée juice, to bleed off, and then they ferment that. And usually those are wines that you'll find, say, in Napa Valley, where really the way that wine was created was the winemaker wanted to concentrate the red Cabernet, so they bled off a little juice early on. So there was less liquid to dilute, and you'd get a better color and a fuller body. So a lot of high-end wine regions will have rosés that are really just the byproduct of concentrating the tank for the red wine. So those are really the two main. You've got free-run wines and macerated wines. Champagne, sparkling wine, is actually blended, so it would be mixing red wine and white wine, but that's rarely done, if ever, in quality rosé. Rosé is made during the winemaking process rather than blending. So with that, let's start with the first wine. So a bit about where I am. The restaurant behind me is a restaurant in the town of Getaria. Getaria is on the northern coast of Spain, in the Bay of Biscay, and it is a fishing village, very old fishing village. And the restaurant behind me, Elcano, is one of the I think it's number 16 in the top 50 restaurants in the world. Elcano is, if you love fish, it's a Mecca-like pilgrimage, and worth every effort to get there. And so if you ever happen to be in Getaria, beautiful little seaside village, definitely hit up Elcano. So if you can look behind me, behind this building, there's some grassy hills, and those hills continue gradually increase in elevation behind here. And they are planted to grapes that produce really two styles of wine. The wine is called Txakoli. So this is Basque country. Txakoli is a Basque word. But Txakoli is primarily made from an indigenous grape. The white version, Txakoli, is made from an indigenous grape called Handarabi Zuri. And it's a grape that's grown here for centuries. Farmers have made this wine here for centuries. This is a very traditional thing in the region of Getaria. In the early 90s, they actually got the region certified as a DO, so a protected wine growing region. So actually the wine of Guittaria has its own distinguished DO. But it grows, the grapes grow on this hill overlooking the ocean. They're actually elevated. I wish I had a good picture of the vineyards, but the grapes are trellised because it's fairly misty, and mold and mildew potentially can be a problem. So because they are trellised and they hang off the trellises, they are, I'm sorry, pergolas, hang off the pergolas, they have a lot of air contact and therefore don't have issues with mold and mildew. But this is a very old wine. I don't know if this will show up, but there's a pour spout that is very traditional in this region. Hopefully you can see that. It's green, so it may turn into green screen, but and the pour spout, I often have these at my store. I've asked, for a whole bunch of reasons, they've not been available for the last 2 seasons. But in Spain, they will pour the wine, and I'm not going to get more elaborate than that, but they'll pour it 2 or 3 feet above the head. And using these spouts, it creates a very nice fine stream of wine, which then breaks the bubbles. Now, if you're ready to pour some of the Rosé chocolate, if you have that in your glass. And again, if you don't, see if you can pour a little bit just to agitate the wine and give it some spritz. But this is a wine made with mostly Handarabi Zuri, and then there's another Handarabi Barza, I think it is. It's the black version of Handarabi, actually a relative of Cabernet Franc. But it is, you can see there's a little bit of spritziness to it. They bottle it, they age it rather in stainless steel and deliberately attempt to capture some of the dissolved CO2 to put in the bottle. And that pour spout, they talk about breaking the wine. They want to release that dissolved CO2 and kind of open it up. And when that happens, it becomes a little more expressive. But give the glass a nose. Yeah, I just love this wine. Chocolate, it's kind of and I would say both the white and the rosé are in the same vein. It is a state of mind. If you can, if you were standing on the balcony of the building behind me, you'd be looking out over the ocean, rocky cliffs, grassy hills, just beautiful scenery, fishing boats coming in constantly. And this is the wine that you wash that moment down with. Very citrusy, minerally. You can kind of taste a little bit of salinity. I mean, not surprisingly, it's right next to the ocean. So a little salinity, but citrus and maybe some red fruits, red cherry, rhubarb maybe. But just a very clean, fresh morning at the beach kind of smell. And yeah, this is a great wine. It's a grape that, again, many hundreds of years has been used, but it fell out of favor. And it really has been since the 1980s, that they have really worked to take this traditional grape and elevate it to the point. I mean, it started with just getting growers to replant it, and there are not a lot of growers in this area. This winery, Chaman, again, a Basque word, but Chaman is a very old, one of the most famous chocolate producers in the area, but there are not a ton of producers growing this. And so it took kind of buy-in by the farmers, and then a lot of hard work from the growers. But this is definitely a stop on the World Wine Tour. Chocolate is a wonderful wine.
So
food. Oh, go ahead.
No, there's a question from Scott talking about you mentioned that the grapes are destemmed as part of the process. Isn't that always done?
No.
Okay.
there are times. So the stems of grapes contain tannin. The kind of the bitterness that you get from coffee, from chocolate. It can be ripe. It can be unripe. There are times. I mean, sometimes it's hard to. You actually have to look at, and I mean the stem has to be completely brown by the top so that the tannins are fully ripe. But if a winemaker decides that, oh, the wine needs a little more structure, they will leave the stems on. It's referred to as whole cluster fermentation, and it imparts sort of a woodsy note. Pinot Noir often will get whole cluster fermentation because it doesn't always the tannins, the bitterness that you need for the structure in the wine is found in the skin, and Pinot Noir has thin skins by nature. So there are times where they will actually leave the skins on deliberately, but for the most part, yes. Many wines, I wouldn't say most, but probably the majority. Actually, I would say most. The majority of wines are destemmed. Yes.
Interesting. So, do you store these any differently than a white or a red? I mean, you refrigerate them obviously, but I mean, is there different temperature for keeping them fresh, I guess?
Well, I mean, storage definitely in the fridge once it's open, and that's true for all wines, red, white, rosé. The fridge with the cork really does seem to extend it the longest. But as far as service, rosés are weird. Some of them love to be ice cold. I mean, I've been in Guitarria on a hot day, and I there's no temperature that could have been cold enough for me not to enjoy that wine. Some rosés, however, when they get too cold, they actually close up and they just don't taste like much. So there are styles that I think. I mean, rosés from Provence, for example, typically don't mind a pretty good chill, but certain wines from further north in France really do need a little warmer temp. Tavel, there's a wine called Tavel, and it has very dark color, richer body, and it doesn't want to be ice cold. It closes down. So, but definitely cool. I mean, there's never. It'll be. I mean, once it hits room temperature, it's definitely too warm, but there's a wide range that it works very well before it gets to that point. And I should mention also for food, rosé, it's spectacular. I mean, it's kind of like there's nothing on a Thanksgiving table that rosé doesn't like. In the case of rosé chocolate, seafood is what they eat predominantly in this area, so that would be what they would likely have it with. But appetizers, jamon, cheeses, olives, Marcona almonds, things like that. Great little snack wine, luncheon wine, brunch wine. Loves it. Rosés love eggs, so very, very food friendly. But it's so there's almost nothing that you can't throw a rosé at that it won't work with.
Nice.
Well, shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I was reading, Jack, you had a comment.
Oh, yeah, please.
He said, I didn't buy this wine because I chanced on it a couple of weeks ago and just drank 2 bottles. It's my absolute favorite porch wine now.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
we actually, in part because I dearly love wines from this part of Spain, and so every year we actually will bring in Chaman, this particular wine. Well, actually, there are 2 that we've worked with, but this is one of our favorites. But we'll bring it in. It comes in once a year. It doesn't last a huge long time. I mean, I think we'll probably be done with it by probably the middle of October. but it is it's one of my it welcomes summer every year, spring and summer every year, and I thoroughly agree. Great little bottle.
Nice seasonal stuff. So Jack, do you have anything special that you're eating with your wine tonight? Yep, you're muted.
Well, I'm not drinking that wine tonight,
Okay,
but
right.
I'm with him 100%. I was one of those fools when I lived in California that took the left turn with white Zinfandel and didn't understand rosés. And in the last year or so, I've learned better. And from domestic ones that are made here in Kansas to these in Spain or the ones in California, I'm trying every one I can get my hands on, and I find every one of them is good with every food. I'm for the other wine, I'm noshing on something that's umami and sour, and another thing that's fruity and sweet. And it goes with both of them. That's the wonder of it. It's so, I love it with spicy food. I love it with spicy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the nice thing about rosé is it has a fair amount, usually has a fair amount of acid, and that acid, is a great counterpoint to fat and to richness, but is not so aggressive that it overpowers lighter foods. I mean, it really does. It's a Swiss Army wine, for sure.
I mean, for an appetizer, anything with hummus is like perfect because it's creamy and like a garlic hummus, and this wine, perfect.
Yep.
It's awesome.
No, I completely agree. Yeah. I think, I mean, it just, aside from the fact that it's just such an old traditional wine from such an amazing place, I'm a big fan. You mentioned the white Zinfandel thing. It's actually a funny story because ironically, the winemaker who discovered white Zinfandel, the winemaker Bob Trinchero, he was not intending to make a sweet wine. When it happened, he was actually making a Saignée wine. Trinchero is in Napa Valley. And he was making a big, rich Zinfandel, and he needed to bleed off a little bit of the juice. So he put the Zin grapes in and macerated them for a couple, maybe a couple hours, 5-6 hours, and then started draining off the juice and intended to sell that as a rosé in the tasting room. And there is a process in winemaking where basically nitrogen levels in the wine drop and the yeast goes to sleep. It's called stuck fermentation. And so Bob Trinchero had these tanks filled with wine that had this stuck fermentation. I mean, he went back and he tasted it, and it tasted like a melted watermelon Jolly Rancher. And he said, well, bottle it. I'm not pouring this down the drain. Bottle it, sell it in the tasting room, make it go away. And that wine was Sutter Home White Zinfandel. And about 4 years ago, it was reported that Sutter Home had actually passed the $1 billion mark on sales in that little fortunate accident that happened to Bob. But the vast majority. I mean, I can't say that I despise White Zin. I mean, White Zinfandel is gotten a lot of people drinking wine. It's a great kind of, I mean, it sounds disparaging, but we would call it a training wheels wine. It gets people into drinking wine, and we're always wanting to have people make a connection with wine. There are definitely examples of good White Zinfandel and definitely not good White Zinfandel. And unfortunately, one of my favorite White Zins was from Napa, and we can't get it anymore. But if you are a fan of White Zin, Bueller, a winery out of the Napa Valley, makes a spectacular White Zin. I mean, it's off dry, but it's got a ton of acid and it's really balanced, and it's quite a nice wine. But so I can't completely disparage White Zin. It has helped out some people to get into wine, but there's a lot more to see. You just came in the entrance. Like let's go to let's go visit the park. But
So, so what's the difference between like a rosé and a blush wine, or is there a difference?
same. No,
Same.
wine.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. I always think
Yeah.
of blush wine as really sweet, but
Well, it was yes. I mean, there in the heyday of White Zinfandel, a lot of people were trying to capitalize on White Zinfandel's success, but not using Zinfandel. So they would make just a generic blush, and the blush would be whatever red grape they needed to get rid of. Probably got cheap, or the winery needed to get rid of some way. Because the wines would be sold at a fairly low price, they either had to be sort of scraps, or they had to be acquired at a low cost just to make everything work. So yeah, blush wines were more likely just generic. It might be a blend of red grapes that were fermented off dry and bottled that way.
Okay.
But yeah, no, we don't see. I mean, really, I think the overly sweet rosé, the overly sweet rosés in the market have kind of faded in the background, and there's a ton of rosé being made today. Not all of it's great. I mean, some of them are really just kind of wineries trying to capitalize on the popularity of rosé, but for the producers that do it very well, I mean, for under $15 easily, you can find a spectacular wine, no question.
Great.
Well, shall we go to the second wine?
Sure.
All right. So the Chocolate was a macerated wine. So this too, I thought about this later. I kind of wish I'd had a Saunier wine. I don't know if I have a Saunier wine in my store at the moment, but just to show the context. So the difference, the contrast. So this also is a macerated wine. In this case, it was mostly Grenache with a little Syrah and some Cinsault. Those are all grapes that are used for the production of rosé in the south of France. The region of Provence uses those same grapes. This particular wine comes from a winery called Marietta, which is located, I want to say the winery is in Mendocino, but it may be in northern Sonoma. But anyway, North Coast, California. They are now on their second. The family is Bilbro, and Scott Bilbro is currently the winemaker there. He took over from his father, so it's a second generation winery. They started out by buying a lot of fruit from growers in that area. There are a lot more growers than there are wineries in that part of California, and they didn't need to. They've since acquired some property themselves, and in both Sonoma and Mendocino, and are making some really phenomenal wines. But this one, I mean, in contrast, a little more body on it, a little more weight in the mouth, but still kind of a wonderful rosé nose, tart there berries, citrus, maybe some grapefruit, melon. Usually it can be either, there are times where I actually do get kind of the watermelon, watermelon Jolly Rancher. There are times where that nose kind of pops. But I often get either like the rind of a watermelon. So it's not sweet. It just has that clean kind of watermelon note to it. And then honeydew, green melons. It has more of that. Cantaloupe doesn't show up that often, although it does sometimes. But green melon and watermelon rind are usually kind of more common. Citrus, lemon, definitely some grapefruit there, maybe pink grapefruit. But yeah, so certainly in this case, they did not attempt to retain the retain the CO2. So it was not intended to be spritzy the way the other one was. Lots of acid. I mean, my mouth is still watering. I mean, that's kind of the great thing. I mean, this is for the person who, expects rosé to be sweet. This is a great wine to shock them with, because like I said, it just makes your mouth water. The last thing that your tongue is doing after you swallow is watering. And that makes it very food friendly. It washes the palate clean, refreshes it, complements certain flavors. I mean, like I love rosé. I think I mentioned eggs. It's a great brunch wine, but actually, rosé champagne is probably the very, very, very best brunch wine. But rosé loves pork. It loves salmon, lighter proteins, salads, summer salads. It's just it just seems to embody the, you're sitting at a picnic table under a perfectly blue sky with water in the background. I mean, that's the glass. That's what you're experiencing with a glass of rosé. It really is. I state of mind.
Yeah. No, it's nice. If anybody has any tasting notes or things you want to share in terms of this particular wine, you can put them in the chat or unmute yourself and chit chat.
No, it's funny. This wine, we followed this winery for a long time. I like Marietta very much, and the last 4 or so vintages, they have done exceptionally well in the wine trades, and it's gotten harder and harder for us to get this because it's when it scores very well for the stores that use scores, and it's been we did a wine club with this winery years ago, and I don't think we could do it today simply because we couldn't get the product. But it's they're doing some cool stuff at Marietta. I really like this one.
Yeah, it's tasty. I really like it too. So how long does a bottle of open rosé like this last? I mean, is it, if you refrigerate it?
I'll probably, I mean, I've got 2 open bottles myself. I would say probably 2 to 3 days. I mean, they'll start to mute a little bit. The chocolatey it loses obviously the bubbles, so the kind of the prickliness on the tongue changes a little bit, but still, now these wines are delicious. They can hold in the fridge for. I would probably still drink it 4 to 5 days, but 2 to 3 it's gonna lose very little in the 2 to 3.
Yeah, I can probably report that the Morgans would be the 4 to 5 day group. Make it stretch as long as possible. Scott, did you have a question?
Well, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You talk about, like you follow this wine, Marietta. I mean, given the Kansas liquor laws, do you have to then find a wholesaler to bring it in, or can you order directly from a vineyard? I just am curious how a liquor store, you go all around the world and you find these places. How do you get it in your store?
Yeah. So that's a great question. In a nutshell, it all goes back to the laws that were passed following Prohibition. And after Prohibition, the federal government was concerned because there were great examples prior to Prohibition of things they wanted to now avoid, particularly in California. I mean, in the late 1800s, there were companies that I mean, they owned the company store. They gave you your mortgage on your house. They owned the liquor stores. They owned the vineyards. They owned the processing. They controlled everything. It was absolutely monopolistic, and so the federal government took that as kind of this is what we want to avoid. And so they created what's called the 3-tier system. And the 3-tier system is a federal, every state has to abide by it. But liquor has to be sold from a supplier. And in the case in this case, that can be a winery, it can be a U.S. importer, but it has to be, it cannot be a distributor. So it goes from a supplier to a distributor to a retailer. And actually in Kansas, sort of really 4 tiers, because in the state of Kansas, like for example, if I sell to a restaurant, restaurants are not allowed to purchase in Kansas, are not allowed to purchase wine directly from a distributor. They have to purchase it through a federally permitted retailer. And so that actually adds a 4th tier. But the way a wine is brought into the state is a distributor will make a decision to invest in a brand, and they will sign an agreement with the winery. The winery will ship it to maybe a consolidation warehouse, but the winery will facilitate the transportation a little bit of that product. Most of it's on the distributor, but then the distributor brings it into the state, licenses the products with the state of Kansas, and then sells them to licensed retailers. So unfortunately, I can't go to a winery and work out a deal myself. The good thing is today I deal with maybe 15 different distributors. So there are a lot of people who are looking for products that are good. And if you can make a solid argument that this is a good product, you can usually find a distributor who will take the chance on it. But yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot going on in the tiers. Wholesalers need to know that they can sell a product before they bring it in, and not all products sell equally well. There are products that sell very well in some locales and won't sell at all in others. So the suppliers and the distributors really have to kind of weigh the advantages and disadvantages to bringing a product into a state. But usually if it's a good product, we can get it. Now, the other thing is there are certain wineries that are simply so small, it's not worth the effort to have a distributor. They would not make any money. They would lose money in some cases because selling it to a distributor, the winery is selling it probably at a 50 to 60% discount. And so if a winery is selling a small amount of wine, it's not in their interest to have a distributor, which then means that either they can essentially get a specific permit, pay for a permit themselves to bring it into the state, to mail it to you. And some wineries will. It's not really that much to register. Like if a small winery in Sonoma wants to send you their wine, but no distributor carries it, it might cost them, $300 to license their wine for Kansas, but they have to determine that it's not a one-off sale. So unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers to getting product. Some of them, a lot of them just center around business and is it a good investment? Unfortunately, there's always a plentiful supply of wine that sells itself and nobody really cares too much about loyalty to. And then the great stuff, really has to, you gotta kind of work that one to get it in the door. But
Hey,
yes, sir.
John.
Yeah, is the Spanish winery near Bilbao or in that area?
Yes. From here, maybe 2 hours to Bilbao, 2 or 3 hours, maybe less, 2 to 3. Yeah. No, it's this is and Bilbao. I love Basque country. It's sort of an otherworldly place. The Basque reside in the northern part of Spain and have for centuries, and they have their own language that has no connection to Romance languages. It is like an alien language. Every Basque will speak Spanish, of course, and and maybe even speak some of the other dialects in that area, but they also speak their own language. And Basque, it came from them. There's no, I mean, they do not know where the Basque language originated. It did not originate in the traditional way. I guess that's what I should say. And the Basque have fended off every invading army ever. There is an independence movement for this part of Spain. I mean, there are a lot of kind of independence movements throughout Spain, but the Basque, crazy hard workers, as friendly as they come, have amazing food and wine sensibilities. And Bilbao is this amazing industrial. I mean, the Basque. I mean, they understood that having access to water was essential, and so Bilbao was created, as a place to build ships. And then, when times kind of got, I mean, there was a time where Bilbao was really struggling, and they came up with this idea of inviting the greatest architects from around the world to rebuild Bilbao. And so you go today, and it's, I mean, if you're even slightly interested in architecture, Bilbao is just kind of a fantasy world. I mean, you'll see, like Guggenheim right next to a 12th century building that's still looking perfect. I mean, it's just amazing. So if you ever get to I highly recommend this part of Spain. It's truly wonderful.
Sounds like a field trip to me. All the retirees can descend on Bilbao. That sounds awesome.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Good times.
Yeah, I've had to mute because my dog has told us that it's time to eat, and she's been barking in the background.
That's okay.
Great timing.
That is okay.
Ah, goodness. Yeah, Shelley had a comment about wine coolers, saying that that's what I thought that was what wine coolers were for, to get rid of bad wine. So is that any truth to bad wine in wine coolers?
Well, wine coolers, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to kind of imagine what the process was. And I think that at the time that in the 80s, when wine coolers really became a thing, wine was kind of at a crossroads. I mean, if you went to a nice restaurant, the menu was in French or Italian, maybe a little smattering of American, but for the most part, it was in a foreign language that you had to have the sommelier would come over and translate the menu for you. And I think it was like, we need something that still keeps wine growers in business, but is the complete opposite of that. And that would be Bartles and James, like, two guys sitting on their porch playing banjos. That was, I will confess, I used to beg my parents, and I was probably 12 or 13, but they were still advertising Bartles and James on TV, and I was like, I got to try this. So I think I definitely motivated my parents to pick up some Bartles and James wine coolers. But I think it was an answer to wine had gotten kind of stodgy, overly complicated, and they needed something that was the complete opposite of that. And it was. It was two guys sitting on a front porch. There was nothing stodgy about that. I mean, it was just this is good times. Be us. Sit on your front porch. But yeah, I know the funny thing about Rosé is, for the longest time, I mean, it's. I would say probably within the last 5 to 7 years, Rosé sales have changed dramatically. Prior to that, when Rosés, as I said, Rosés typically come out, Northern Hemisphere Rosés will come out in March. Prior to that, like all of my sales guys and they would tell us what Rosés were coming in, and we would order them all in, and then one sales guy would buy Rosé from another one. And through us, I mean, we'd run it through the store, but basically the wines would come into the store and go out to distributors because they love rosé. Rosé was never like kind of a whoops, this was an accident, let's bottle it and get rid of it. It was like, this is stuff the winemaker made for himself, and we were able to get some. I mean, it's definitely gone mainstream, but rosé used to be for the trade. Definitely, rosé was like guilty pleasure kind of stuff. I mean, it was. I mean, I've been part of wine clubs where, and the wines were hundreds of dollars at release, and I get my letter in the mail, and it's like, well, you've been allocated 4 bottles of this single vineyard Cabernet, and 3 bottles of this Syrah, and 3 bottles of this Pinot Noir, and a bottle of rosé. Well, and I call up and I'd be like, possible to get another bottle of rosé? Nope. You can have a case of that $300 Cabernet that we offered you, but you can't have any more rosé. And it was actually the most coveted thing. But it was usually the winemaker. I had some, I was making this trophy wine and I needed to bleed off some juice. So I bled it off. I bottled the rosé, and here's a rosé of a wine that if it stayed in the tank, would cost $300-400. And, wow. And even, I mean, not all of it was trophy wine. I mean, it might be a $50 wine, but to be able to drink a rosé that was made from fruit that was destined for a bottle that they were going to command the top shelf price on. I mean, that was amazing. But it was just like I said, guilty pleasure kind of wine. So yeah. I strongly encourage people to explore rosé. It's truly, it's not serious. It's just to remind you to, take a deep breath, sit on your porch, look at the birds, smell the flowers.
That's
go to
okay.
The beach. Yeah. No, all good.
It's become a Jack Altman porch wine, which is a high compliment.
Yes. No, that's a very useful tool.
Yeah. And Jack has a comment. Some of us are at an age that we began our better wine drinking with Matus in the 60s and early 70s, but we forget that was a rosé, which is true.
That was.
Yeah.
And actually it's funny. So to bring Matus up to speed, it was a rosé from Portugal, made with grapes that nobody's ever heard of and still nobody today knows, made in an off-dry style and marketed as like the coolest thing since sliced bread. And again, was it a great wine back then? Not really, but did it at least get people drinking wine? Yes. So it wasn't horrible in the sense that it did its job. Now, fast forward to today, Matus is still made. However, it is dry now. I ordered in a bottle, maybe 3-4 years ago to taste, just because I hadn't had it in. I mean, I was tasting my parents' wine in the 70s, so I sort of remember Matus. But it was dry. It didn't have the character, and I learned that Matus actually retooled it because the market today does prefer, or the market they were essentially they were going after does prefer a little less sweet. But yeah, you can still get Matus, and it might even be a better product today than it was back then. So
does it still come in a swanky bottle?
My recollection is the bottle is similar, but it's not the same. I mean, the old one was kind of
kind of oval. Yeah, exactly.
Oval. Right. And
we looked it up. We looked it up not long ago, and you can get Matus for, I think, under $20, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But if you get it in a vintage bottle, it's like $200. I mean,
sure,
because people have kept them, and they're selling the bottle, not the wine now, which is really funny. But for us, it was the fancy restaurant wine as opposed to the beer or wine we drank in college.
Yeah.
If we took our girlfriend out to a date, then you might order Mateus.
Yeah. No, I mean, Matus was, I mean, it was also the time when, you know, Chianti was really trying to make a play. Italian restaurants were, I mean, this would be like the 50s, 60s. Italian restaurants were becoming more popular domestically, and they tried to make a play, and the straw wrapped bottle, which ironically, the name of that bottle is called a fiasco.
Oh.
Which is hilarious because
it's a good fun fact.
that was absolutely the description of the wine in the bottle. I mean, the worst thing that you could do would be drink it. The best thing you could do would be to melt a candle down the side. And it literally, that is a reputation that followed Chianti for a long time. In fact, they actually had, I think it was around 2000, had a concerted effort to bury that reputation, improve quality, but the last thing that they wanted you to think of when you said Chianti was the straw wrapped bottle with the red candle dripping down the side. Yeah, no, they, you know, I were they great wines? No, they were not great wines, but did they move the ball? Yeah, they probably did. And so you know, White Zinfandel, Matus, Chianti, and a fiasco. They helped. They kept the thing, the ball moving. You know, so I appreciate that.
Well, Cliff has a question. Can you describe the range of tastes of rosé compared to, say, Pinot Noir?
Sure. The range of tastes. I mean, they generally focus on acidic fruit. So it might be sour cherries, it might be citrus, and that could be anything from lemon, tangerine, grapefruit, orange. Usually it's more tangerine, and even almost like canned mandarin orange notes, but tart flavors, citrus, melon. Again, usually the less sweet kind of flavored melon. So green melon, honeydew, watermelon rind, berries, raspberries, cherries, some strawberry. Actually, no, definitely strawberry and cherry, depending on the grape. So like Pinot Noir, for example, the rosés of Pinot Noir, lots of strawberry and cherry. But again, bright acid, not you don't think you're eating like overripe fruit. Pinot Noir will get a little fuller ripeness than rosé will. So even if you're making the same wine, so Pinot, like a Pinot Noir that does go into a barrel and get fermented into a red wine, definitely fuller bodied, more concentrated flavors. And because there's often barrel aging, you'll get some fuller bodied flavors and even some dark fruits. So the effect of the barrel changes. Most rosés are stainless steel. They're fermented, or concrete. They're fermented so that the freshness of the fruit is preserved. They want to ferment it at a fairly cool temperature. They want to keep it cool, and they want to bottle it fairly quickly. So very few rosés are barrel aged. Some are, but the vast majority are stainless steel or concrete, and that's done to preserve that vibrancy of fruit. But yeah, the fruit, I would say if there's one common theme, it would be like tartness. So everything's just a little touch underripe, maybe. But you get from like the region of Tavel, much fuller bodied red wine. I mean, it almost looks like a light colored red wine. I mean, it has a lot more color, certainly more color than the wines we have today. But it gets, I mean, you get maybe some roasted herb notes. There's a little more savory. So the fuller the body, the more depth of flavor you get. But for the most part, rosés they're meant to be kind of light on their toes. And so the flavors, they don't want to kind of conjure up a lot of intensity because they're light and breezy. and that's kind of what their focus is.
Yeah, just perfect. Really, really perfect for the summer. They're,
Great for spring and summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, can't beat that. Well, any other questions? We're starting to bump up against 6 o'clock here, so I want to respect your time. But our next session for Wine Around the World. Oh, Shelley, do you have a question? Or that,
Yeah,
that's
I put
go
it in
for
the
it.
chat. I actually put it in the chat. I was wondering how much difference there was. Was there actually a difference in the time of fermentation time between rosés and red wines, or is it more about the aging?
Great question. Rosés typically, so the grapes will come into the winery. They'll be destemmed, crushed, macerated with the juice for several hours, put into a stainless steel tank and fermented. It's probably gonna be 6 to 8 months before that's sitting on a shelf somewhere. Maybe let's see. Yeah, 6 to 10 months. 6 to 10 months. It's sitting on a shelf, and so the time that it spends. I mean, it's not aging in oak, so it doesn't need to develop. And when a red wine ages in oak, it needs that time. The chemistry of the wine is changing, and it's a desirable change. We want that to happen, and it takes several years, in fact, of barrel aging to get the red wine where it needs to be. But no, this is fermented, and even in the case of the chocolate, they're wanting to retain a lot of CO2, so they're fermenting it and bottling it pretty quickly. We get this through our distributor direct imports this. I'm guessing probably we usually see it around July. I'm guessing that it probably, in some markets shows up in May, but it was grapes in October still. So it's rosés are fairly short fermentation and almost no aging.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we are now officially at 6 o'clock. So mark your calendars for Thursday, September 15th, which is the next session of Wine Around the World coming up. I will thank Janie Marples for bringing her special guest to our Wine Around the World session today. Looks like you have a new grandbaby, so very exciting. So with that, everybody have a great weekend. Go out and buy yourself a bottle of Matus and hang out on the porch, huh?
Like Bartles and James.
That's right. That's right. It all comes full circle.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good night and thanks again. Take care.
Thank you.